Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Super Saiyan 3 Goku 2.0 bootleg fix attempt. As you can see, I have fully separated everything at this particular point of the video. The upper torso did not exactly go willingly, namely as you'll be seeing in a second in the footage here. While I was able to remove the central part there, it was only with much resistance, as a lot of the tabs and little pins that were used to hold the upper torso together ended up kind of snapping or bending severely, because the plastic they use on that stuff was actually very, very poor. It's probably meant to be flexible enough in order to work with the middle joint there, but terrible, and it melted together when I was trying to actually separate this. So this made it a little bit of a mess. Apathetically, it's something fixable, but it's going to be a little ugly on the way back. Another thing which was planning on making some changes to, which I didn't mention in the previous video, is that of all the faces there, technically one of the faces are actually missing at this point. The one where it has Goku staring off to the side. So I'm going to have to figure out something creative in order to address that in a little bit. But that's kind of one of the minor fixes. And another small little fix which came thankfully very painlessly is the little halo bit here with the stress mark from before. Yeah, a little bit of a heat source fixed that right up. So at least one thing down, at least 2 to 3 things left to go. Let's begin. Alright, just to address what's going on in the video right now, yes, this is actually incredibly bad practice. I would not do this again in hindsight, and I would definitely not recommend doing this. If you're going to do something like this, you want to have a proper separate vise, or something to hold it in place. Don't hold it with your hands, even with something else. Also, it turns out I had a much better tool in hand, which I only remember after the fact. And unfortunately, with the Dremel cut that I did at first, I ended up taking off and kind of melting / destroying a lot of the pin, a lot more than I originally planned on, so this will actually be causing me a lot more problems, as we're going to be seeing as this video goes on. Now, even if it had gone right, something I would have needed to do is, after cleaning up and making a flush bottom there, I would need to drill a hole roughly the size of the pin I just cut in order to shorten it up a bit. Technically, this is how it would have looked like if it was done properly regardless of what. Fortunately, I had a much smaller kind of a drilling tool that I had picked up off Amazon that took a little while, even on the higher settings, but it actually did the job fairly well without making too much of a mess. I'll have to see if I can find it again and leave a link in the description for this particular item, because it's actually quite useful. Basically from there, as you can see, it takes a few little bits, but it does manage to kind of drill or bore out a hole that is clean enough in order to fit the peg in there. And from what's left of the peg, now cleaned up by this point of the video, it will end up slotting in there just fine. On more promising fronts, I ended up taking that small little drill bit and also using it for the attempts to fix the various heads, which, like I mentioned, don't exactly fit properly. And at least that one is proving much more successful up to this point. After using the drill bit to really just kind of sand and cut off the walls to extend them as necessary, they are fitting a lot better now. This is just a footage of me kind of cleaning up one of the first heads, kind of the yelling head I believe in that case, which really didn't fit before. It would pop off very easily, and with a little more work as it goes here and there, it gradually did end up fitting a lot better, and now it fits much more solidly than it used to be. Another thing which I don't think I did on camera in this case is I also used the hobby exacting knife to kind of clean up the edges a little bit more, since obviously when you're drilling it's kind of inexact, and between that and the drilling, it turns out all the heads now have a much better fit, which is good. So that means they're actually all usable now at this point, which is a nice little plus. And here is what was my attempt in order to deal with that whole peg issue I was just mentioning earlier in the video. In order to address the fact that the peg is now too small, I actually took some epoxy sculpt and actually made a makeshift little extension on both the peg itself as well as a little bit of a stopgap plug on the upper part of the torso. The idea behind this was, at least I was hoping at the time, that I could use the extension, which the epoxy sculpt is actually stronger than the original peg's plastic itself, and attach those together in order to kind of make a makeshift, more sturdy peg that would still be short enough in order to fit, but also strong enough that it would be able to hold things in place. And since I already had sculpted, mixed a bit much of the epoxy sculpt anyway, I actually took one of the faces, since as it turns out one of them is actually a duplicate face, a duplicate kind of smiling face. I sanded down the facial features a bit and used a bit of epoxy sculpt in order to actually sculpt the missing face in this case. Because I didn't realize, I might have not mentioned this earlier, but because of the duplicate face, I'm actually missing the face of Goku that's staring off in the side angle there, the more stern, serious face. That's missing on my bootleg, so here's my attempt to kind of make a makeshift fill-in for that one. So this needs to be cleaned up and sanded down a bit and obviously painted, but in theory, it's a start. Unfortunately, this is kind of where things fell apart quite literally on this particular repair attempt. Namely, the middle peg system that I was just showing you earlier, me trying the epoxy sculpt / plastic blend in order to work it in. Turns out it didn't hold in this case when I was attempting to super glue stuff together. Namely on account that when I had to sand down the epoxy sculpt in order to really fit in the peg system I set up, it ended up taking off too much material that between the plastic and the sculpt, the epoxy material, it just didn't have enough to hold together properly. So at the current time, I don't have the middle peg working in here. I actually had to use some super glue to kind of hold things in place while I think of a proper solution. And while I've been able to make some other adjustments there, this is kind of the sticking point of the figure right now. So there's definitely going to be a part 3 to this where I attempt to address that, or at least fix what I can on this figure from here on out. And we'll just have to continue that on another day, because at the moment I'm waiting for a few parts to come in order to see what I can do to address this. So for now, this is a disgruntled ninja signing off, I suppose, and come back next time for what is hopefully a fruitful and fulfilling part 3 of this particular set.